Scotty, you just have to, you're the presenter now. Yeah.
1 second.
You have to click, yeah, show my screen.
Yeah, I got it. I was just making sure that I was showing the correct screen.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, everybody, it's about time to get started. Good morning, everybody in India. Good morning, to everybody in India and different parts of the world, different times. Another exciting webinar from Scotty Craig and Som Sohoni. I'm hoping all of you have now got used to these webinars and the way we are conducting them and the interaction that we're having among ourselves and with all of you through your questions. We really appreciate all the questions that you're sending. You might have, many of you I'm sure have been watching the recordings, accessing the recordings on Canvas, and those who were expecting some kind of a piece of certificate at the end of all of it, maybe doing some of the assignments that I've been putting up. So here we go. Scotty, you're on.
Okay, thank you very much. And again, welcome everybody. So today we're going to continue our discussion on publishing and publishing within engineering education. Just to recap from session 2, we showed you examples of some very typical and standard outlets for publishing in engineering education papers, both journals and conferences. And we described several ways in which you can access these and cite your papers, and along with answering a lot of your questions. And again, just to encourage you, please do feel free to ask questions. As we were talking, we are more than happy to answer questions, and questions are actually extremely important for the overall learning process. So let's move on to what we're going to be talking about today. Our plan for today's session.
Hey, Scotty, your slides aren't progressing.
My slides aren't what? Oh,
I
weird.
still see slide 1. Yeah.
Oh, that's.
They're moving on a different screen?
Yeah, they were moving in the other screen, but not in this
Okay.
one. Thank you for pointing that out. So apparently I actually have to click over here now to get them to move. So today, our plan for today, we're going to address some of your additional questions from the participants that we had. Specifically, we're going to look at some questions dealing with outlet quality. And we talked a little bit about this at the end of the session last week, and we're going to go into it a lot more detail this week. And then I'm actually going to give you some examples of how to find literature on research topics, which will then blend right into the fourth topic, which is writing your introduction section. So today we may, towards the end, we may get into writing introduction. However, it may be that writing the introduction may go over today and the next session. So if you think about what we talked about last time, just some brief recap. Determining outlets impact. And what do we mean by impact? Impact factor is the number of so it is a number, and it's just a number that attempts to really indicate the average, on average, how much of an impact, how much of a contribution has a printed article made, and specifically how much contribution has all of the articles printed by a specific journal made to the field as a whole. these impact factors, as I said, they are just kind of a number, and there's lots of different ways of getting them. There are lots of different types of impact factors. However, one thing you also have to realize with these impact factors is that they do vary greatly, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, but they vary greatly by area. Two of the main types, which I'll show you a little bit about today, is the Journal Citation Report, the JCR, which is Thomas Reuter's. This is one of the main impact factors. It's one of the original, it's one of the most famous ones. And the one I'm actually going to spend a lot more time on today is, or a little bit more time on today, is through Google Scholar, and that's the H5 index. And I talked to you about these and I described them last time. If you have any questions, we're more than happy to answer those today and address them. Otherwise, if you need a recap on them, you can watch the end of the previous video. Now, one thing about impact factors, people do always kind of argue over impact factors and what is a good impact factor and what makes a good impact factor. The JCR is kind of seen as a standard. The one problem with the JCR is that it is also a little bit exclusive in that you don't get a journal citation report to get impact factors from them until they have reviewed and approved your journal. And the review process that they put journals through can take a year or more to put together. And then they review it. It is not always accepted. It's actually, if they find anything wrong, they will reject it. And then there is a 2-year waiting period. So because of that, some journals that are actually really good journals sometimes do not have journal citation reports, or impact factors based on them. Google Scholar actually provides a much more inclusive metric using the H5 index. So,
Marty, before you get back to the H5, real quick, I wanted to point out that the Journal of Engineering Education, what's considered to be the premier journal for engineering education research, has an impact factor listed on its website as 1.739. Do you want to quickly, tell the audience what that means? I know you've gone over this before, but just real quick.
So, what did you say that was? What was it?
1.739.
1.739. So, what that means, that 1.739, I'm going to round up to about a 2, just so it's easier to do the math. What that means is that over the last 2 years, all of their articles have been cited at least 2 times on average. So 1.5 to 2 times on average, which is actually not bad. And I'll show you their impact factor in a second. So that's really what that means.
Can I jump in there, Scotty? Yeah. Okay. I have noticed coming across many emails, that from various sources that promoting their journals, saying that we have very high impact factors of 3, 4, whatever.
Yes.
And these are all the questionable journals that keep coming up. Now, how can people claim those things, which probably is false claims?
Yeah. Well, okay, and that's actually a very good question. And to be honestly, anybody can claim that their impact factor is anything they want. How do you know if that's the real impact factor? You can actually go to the site, which I'm assuming that everything just switched over to the site. This is the actual Journal Citation Report site, which you can get to sometimes on the web. You can log in through it. Usually you have to log in through your institution, so you can only get in to check these numbers if your university or college has access to it. But most universities and most libraries do have access to this.
So, Scotty, one quick question there. When you say access to this, you don't mean they have to have access to JEE. It's access to
they have to have access to the journal
Advantage.
citation reports through the Web of Science. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that means essentially when you get an email where a journal claims to have an impact factor 3 or 4, you really have no way, no real way to you just have to go by a gut instinct that this doesn't look right.
No, exactly. And that's, in general, if it is a journal you've never heard of before and they're claiming to have a high impact factor.
Or you might have heard about it too many times.
Exactly.
And wanting
but it's always good to check them. Yeah. So what I have here, go back.
Because I know there are a bunch of them in India that claim that, and they're stuck in some remote town somewhere, and they keep getting emails. And I think a lot of faculty in India probably may take that seriously, and I think that's a big issue in India. I think.
Yes, no, I agree. That's one thing. It's always good to double check your sources. So the way I got to this is the ASU webpage. In ASU libraries, I come here. I can click on the Web of Science from here. It takes me to this page, which then I can go to Journal Citation Reports, and in a second this will come up. So you notice that, yes, some journals do have extremely high impact factors. And it's perfectly okay for them to have extremely high impact factors. So, but notice how high some of these are. One thing you have to realize is that that impact factors vary greatly depending on area. So it's important that you don't just think, higher is better. You really have to understand that general area also. And what is generally a good impact factor for an area? Some areas, for example, if they are smaller areas or more specialty areas, tend to have lower impact factors because there are fewer researchers in that area. So, of course, since there are fewer researchers, they're publishing less as far as quantity-wise, and they're citing, which is fewer opportunities for papers to be cited. So because of that, smaller areas tend to have smaller impact factors. So engineering
education might be an example then, right? Okay.
Yeah, engineering education is a wonderful example. Whereas the Journal of Engineering Education is the premier journal in the engineering education area. But as Soham told you earlier, their impact factor
is 1.7, 1.8, let's say.
Yeah, well, I can actually check it here. So their overall impact factor is 1.739. And if you look at that and you compare that to some of those other ones that we saw, 1.7 doesn't seem very high. But for this area, especially when you get to education, and especially like engineering education, anything around 2 to 3 is actually really, if you're getting close to 2 to 3, that is really high. So that's another thing to be aware of. And if you're looking in like some of the more general like education areas though, in educational research, educational research will tend to still only go to around a 3. And that's more general education research. So you have to realize that these numbers are relative. So an impact factor is not everything. But the fact that a journal has one and that you can find it, basically it leads to its reputation. And what you want to compare it to are its peers and peer journals. So this is the Web of Science and their journal citation reports. Again, the problem with this is that it is very exclusive. You may not have access to this. One other outlet that most people do have access to is Google Scholar. Now you get to Google Scholar it's just scholar.google.com or .com. It will take you to this site. I am already logged in here because I have a Google account. If you have a Gmail account, you can log into Google Scholar and just like with a lot of other Google options and things, it will actually track you. It will start watching to see what it is, because Google watches everything. So it'll start to build a profile for you based on your searches. So since I am logged in, you'll see here at the bottom, it actually already has some options for me. It's like, hey, here are some recently published papers that you might be interested in. And that's all based off of what I publish and what I've searched for. But I'll come back to that in just a second. Let me first go on to some of these options up here. Once you log into it, you will see my citation. So if you have published anything, not surprisingly, Google knows. And I'll show you the My Citations page in a second. It will create a personal profile for you that will monitor everything that you've published and let you know as you get as people cite you. Another thing which I want to point out to now and talk about is Google Metrics. This is an extremely useful feature. This is where you can find the H5 indexes for journals. So if you click on Metrics, it's going to take you to this page here. Now you notice here, just like with the Web of Science, the H5 indexes do have a large range. So each area does have a different range for you to look at. But if you take one of the highest ones, this is Nature, the highest H5 index that any journal has that's covered, that is printed in English, is 377. So what that means is that in the last 5 years, Nature has published 377 articles that have been cited 377 times. And you can use this...
At least 377 times.
Yes, at least 377 times. Thank you for the clarification on that one. Now, the one good thing with that Google Scholar gives you is it helps you to kind of narrow down your search for journals. And just to point out to you, everything I'll be looking at and showing you today is in English. If you want to search journals in other languages, you can. Google does give you those options. Now, one thing I want to point out today, because we are talking about engineering education primarily. Now, I want to point out to you, see, social sciences, notice the numbers change. With the highest overall for all social science indexed journals, the highest H5 index is 88, and that is computers and education. But under social sciences, you see these subcategories. So these are predefined categories that Google Scholar gives you. And these are all of them for the social sciences. One thing I want to point out to you is there's a specific one here for science and engineering education. Now again, because science education tends to be much larger than engineering education, what you see here are that a lot of the science education journals have taken over this list of the top 20. However, if you look here, if we come down the list, you will see the Journal of Engineering Education, which has a H5 index of 32. So one other thing, so it's one thing I want to point out to you right here, this 32. And again, I've already explained to you what that means, that these means that 32 papers have 32 citations or above in the last 5 years. But if you click on this 32, remember, notice that this is a hyperlink. here are the 32, actually these are the top 20, and then the next page gives you rest to 32. These are those 32 articles. So you can very quickly find within a journal what are the most cited articles. So that tells you really what people in that who are reading that journal, what is it that they care about? What types of articles do they care about? So that's very useful for starting to drill down. Now, one other thing you might, so I just moved back to let me move back to the primary one here. So this was science and engineering education. You might be like, well, this is too much science. I really care about engineering education. Well, luckily, Google Scholar works just like Google. So when you're in metrics, if you search, it will bring up specifically engineering education. So these are the top 19 journals that have engineering education or have been tagged to be related to engineering education. And you will notice that, as we were saying, the Journal of Education, Engineering Education tends to be a flagship. And again, here, yes, it is actually the #1 journal in the area. So one thing you might see that's missing from the list. So what was the? I'm sorry. What was the journal for the society? Krishna?
Our society. That's Journal for Engineering Education Transformations.
Yeah, transformation. So you might notice that. Wait, it's not here. So why is it not here? Well, you notice this is an H5 index, so it's 5 years. So in order to get into the H5 index, you have to have been publishing, you have to publish at least 100 articles over a 5-year period.
Oh.
Yes. So as soon as your journal hits that 5-year mark, it will automatically be picked up by Google Scholar. So, and I just went through this with another journal that I'm on the editorial board for, the International Journal of Learning Technology, in that we just finally got picked up by Google Scholar because we finally hit that mark. So that's why, in case you were wondering, why isn't the journal in the list? It's not because, it's not because it didn't make it into the list.
Yeah.
That's not it at all. As soon as you get to the 5-year mark, it's going to appear somewhere, probably up in this range somewhere.
Okay.
Maybe even higher. So there you go. So that's why. So that's how you can do it. Just search here. And in case you had another journal, maybe it wasn't engineering education. Maybe you have a specific area of education. Maybe it's computers, or computing education, or programming, something like that. You can put them in to see if there's any very specific journals like that you might want to look for. Sometimes you just know the specific name for the journal. So if we were just looking for, let's see if we can find IEEE transactions. So if you have the name of the journal, if you put that in, it will show you just that journal. So if you don't want the list, if you're just searching out a specific journal, it's a quick way to find these. So that is basically, oops, where'd it go? Okay, so now we've talked about journal citation reports and a little bit on the H5 index. I've showed you how to use Google metrics to find journals and to find out just how much impact those journals have. What I want to transition into now is talking a little bit about finding papers within or finding papers on specific topics using Google Scholar. There are a lot of different places you can search. I'm going to primarily focus on Google Scholar today because it is a very useful and usually free. Well, it's a useful free tool that's very handy for really helping you to narrow down your topics. Now, the two things I want to talk to you about today, if I go back to the actual main Google Scholar page, first is searching. Now, searching in Google Scholar, I should say, is not any different than searching in Google. Anything you type into this box, it will search for articles and it will find articles and bring them to you. I want to also quickly point out this drop-down advanced menu, which is actually very useful. And you can get to all of these if you actually know the Boolean codes to type in also, but in case you don't, you can just fill in these boxes. If you want to find articles, so with all words, you can type that in and it will come up. If you want it to be an exact phrase, sometimes that's useful if you're looking at things, for example, if you're looking for things that are multiple words. So one of my areas of research is on observational learning or vicarious learning. If you put those, just throw them into that search, it will give you everything that has vicarious in it, everything that has learning in it, and everything that has vicarious and learning in it in your search. Anything you put into the exact phrase, it will only bring up things that have that exact phrase. The next one, at least one of the words in case you have a bunch of synonyms. You can put in several synonyms. So if I wanted to look at for articles that were on observational learning, or if I wanted to find stuff on vicarious learning, which those are actually two synonyms for very similar work, I could put them both in here and it would bring in both. Now, this is actually very useful without words. So sometimes, for example, sometimes you want, when you're looking for a topic, there will be a lot of related work in an area that you just don't care about. So if you're looking at, again, so I'm a psychologist, so if you're looking at prevention type research, for example, but you're looking at a specific type of prevention program, and it may be having to do with, just anything, but you don't want stuff on smoking prevention. And smoking prevention has had a lot of research on it, and you may just not care about that. If you put in smoking here, then you will not get articles that are related to smoking prevention. And again, that same works with anything. Another really interesting feature is authored. So if you're looking for, if you want to find works of or by a specific author, so you know somebody's name, you know they've done a lot of work in an area, you can come by authored and just put in their name. Notice you can put in just last name, or you can put in initials and their name. Now, one other thing to point out to you here is the articles published in. Sometimes you want to search for a specific journal. So if you only want to find things that are on a specific topic that are published in a specific journal, you can put in the topic here and the journal name here. So if you want to know what has been done on the role of metacognition in the journal and what has been published there or in the Journal of Engineering Education. So has anybody ever published anything on metacognition in the Journal of Engineering Education? We could find that out. So we just put in here. Make sure you type things correctly. It's always good to spell check. And I could hit search. But before I do that, I do want to point out the date feature. So you can put, if you want to look through a specific date range, you can put that date range in here. Otherwise, it will bring it up anything from any date. So
also, one more thing real quick right there. There's a drop down that says anywhere in the article. Maybe you just want to look at metacognition appearing in the title or in the abstract.
Yeah.
Right. Or
well, actually,
rather than anywhere.
Yeah, so you only get anywhere or title options, unfortunately.
Oh yeah, that's not fun. There should be an abstract there.
So if we look at this, according to this, oh look, there's also a European Journal of Engineering Education. But if we look, so what has been done? So apparently there have been 313 papers published in this area in this journal, and here are all of them. And you can scroll through. This is the first page. Now the interesting thing with this, to point out, notice that this is the first page. What controls what comes on this first page is a strange metric within the Google search, which I have no idea what it is. It basically tries to decide what it thinks are going to be the most relevant articles to you. And I think it does kind of use your search history some in there. So it is possible that different lists, different searches might be slightly different for different people, and different things may come up. One thing I want to point out, notice here, this is the first article, and one good thing that it actually lets you know, especially if you're new to an area, you have never published in the area before, you're just starting to read in that area. So if you were just starting to read within metacognition and look at cognitions used within engineering education, you really need to first start determining how much of an effect a specific paper has, how big of an impact does it have. So just like the H5 index and the JCR impact factor, specific articles also have a measure of impact, which is just the raw citation rate. So notice that this article, Developing Metacognition, Basis for Active Learning, has been cited by 37 people. So what this means is that 37 different articles have cited this paper, whereas the next article on the list, it's only been cited by 7. The next one has only been cited by 3. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that for your paper, this paper is better than this one, because you'll be trying to really build your story for your paper. So it may be that this third one might be more relevant as far as the finding to what you're looking at. But in general, this paper's had a much bigger impact than this third paper. There's a lot of things that could go into that. One might be the year. Notice this was published in 2012. This is 2004. So this has actually been out a lot longer than this paper. Also notice that these don't always go by order of citation. So this one's 37 here. Down here towards the bottom of the page, there's a 34. If we go to page 2, oh look, here's a paper that's actually has been cited 1,097 times. So in general, if you see a paper that is being published or is being cited or has been cited by over 300, 400 people, or even over 1,000, that's most likely a very important paper that you need to read. So that's a really good way if you're just getting into an area. to start finding what are the big papers, what are the most impactful papers. So you look for the ones that have the higher citation rates, because basically what that means is that almost 1,100 other researchers have thought this paper was important enough to include in their reference list. Which means that you probably should read it if you're just getting to know the area. And it will be something that you might want to cite also. I'm going to go back to one of the smaller ones though, or the lesser cited ones. So one thing to point out, so let's assume that this developing metacognition paper here is one that you find highly relevant to your work and you want to cite it. Now it's from 2004. That's kind of old. You might want to see, well, what's been done relevant to this article recently? So this cited by, notice it is a link. If you click on that, this will actually give you a list of all 37 of the papers that have cited that one. So what this does is allow you to go forward in time to see, since that paper was published, what has it impacted? And so what's being done closer up to now in relation to it. One thing to point out over here, right now we're still looking at any time. Because we are looking at using this filter of papers who have cited this one, if we say 2015, these are the papers that have cited that paper that we thought was very important to us since 2015, 2016. So these are the most recent ones. Again, some of these may be useful, they may not be useful at all for you, but it's probably something you should look at to make sure that you're really up to date in your citation ratings or in what you're citing. Because the last thing you want to do is only be citing, is to only cite this paper, which is the original paper, and nothing else. Because your literature review will look very sloppy and it'll look like you did a very bad job. And what that does to you, and what that does to you as a writer when your papers go out for review, and later on if they get published, what that does to people reading your papers is that it hurts your credibility as a writer and as a researcher, because you've missed major gaps in your paper. And it can also ultimately hurt the impact that your paper has. Because if people think that, oh, you're missing a lot of gaps in your background literature, relevant gaps, then it's more difficult to actually really place your findings in light of the larger literature and to show what impact you're contributing. And if you don't do that, a lot of your readers will not do that for you. So that's why it's always good to make sure you have a lot of papers and the correct papers cited, because it does come back to helping your credibility and helping you keep credibility. And it's not uncommon.
This might be a good time.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Scotty. I thought you were done with that.
No, go ahead.
So I was going to say, yeah, this might be a good time to take a step back and think about, why do we even write research papers? What is this whole business of writing articles, these manuscripts, and wanting to publish them?
Right? A question before that from Rajesh Solanki. Can we download papers on Google Scholar?
Yes, that's actually a very good question. So if you notice over here, where it says get it at ASU, because I'm logged into ASU and I'm on ASU campus.
And is it free to download?
So for this, if your university has access to the electronic journals, so if you have these links here, it should be free to download if you have a link over here. So right now, if I wanted this paper, I could click on Get It at ASU. It would take me to the internal link at ASU that gives me this paper. Now, sometimes you see other links here. Notice this one. So from researchgate.net, remember last week I told you about ResearchGate? So sometimes researchers will put up their papers online at places like ResearchGate, and Google Scholar will find those, and it will link it there. So if I wanted to here, I could download this for free from ResearchGate. So you always want to look at these links here on the right. If there's a link here, you can usually download it for free. Otherwise, if you click this up here, oops, well, it will take you to the journal website for the paper, and usually, and as most of you probably know, a lot of times you have to pay there. So always look for these links over here on the side. So I'm sorry, and so you were saying?
Yeah, back to Som. Yeah, sorry, Som. I was interrupting.
Oh yeah, no, I just saw the question from Rajesh after I started talking. So and again, this is more of a philosophical discussion that I don't want to go too much into at this point, but just wanted to quickly remind, why are we so concerned about making sure that we cite the seminal papers or the foundational papers, the ones that have 1,000+ citations and so on, and why is Scotty insisting that our work be relevant and be considered relevant, right? And of course, the reason for that is whenever we're attempting to write a paper, we probably have a plan, we have some goal, we have some motivation for writing that paper, and that motivation should usually be something along the lines of contributing new knowledge to the community, or bringing something new to the community where maybe something was done in a different context and we're trying to do it in a new context, or we're discovering something new. So it really must be, I would say for me at least, the bottom line is what contribution am I making? How am I moving the research agenda for my field forward by writing this paper? And that's why we care about all these other things that we're talking about. Krishna,
Yes.
Scott, do you want to add to that?
No, I think that's a very good point. I've been talking this whole time, so if you want to add.
That's good. No, that's fine. That's good comment there. Yeah. One other question from Jyotsna is, I think one of the big issues that people face in India is the accessibility of papers. Like for example, Journal of Engineering Education. People see the abstract, but they can't get the papers. So Jyotsna is saying, can somebody help them with some prominent papers in the area of engineering education which are not accessible for everyone and place them on our Canvas course? Is that legal?
No, it's not, unfortunately. I wish it was. And again, what you're bringing up is actually a very important issue that hinders a lot of researchers. It's the paywall issue, in that there's so much science that is out there, but it's all locked away behind paywalls. And unfortunately, there's very little that you can do about that. We can't really take it because it is copyrighted materials. So sometimes I've been able to contact researchers who I know who are friends at other universities who may have access, and they can help me get it. Again, in the United States, we have a lot of libraries and university libraries have interlibrary loan options, where you can go to your library and they can get that article for you on loan from another another library. So you can always check that. I'm not sure though if that same system is set up in India or not.
Yeah, let me add a couple of things to that. One, I think first off, you need to figure out what exactly is your area. So for example, are you doing work in electrical engineering education or computer engineering education, for example? And if that's the case, can you push your college or your university to subscribe to, let's say, the IEEE Transactions on Education? or if you're doing a lot of more theoretical work in engineering education, do you want to push your university to actually do get a subscription for the Journal of Engineering Education? That's one option. You can, if there is a critical mass of faculty, you can go to the administration and say, look, we want to be successful in this area, and we just don't have access to the right papers, and that's really hindering our progress. So maybe your institution will actually pay for it, right? The other thing is something that Scotty has brought up in the past, and we've talked about a little bit, which is contacting the authors. So the good thing is whatever Scotty showed you today, all of that information is available to you. And this is a huge deal. I mean, 40 years ago, even 30 years ago, that was not the case. If your library did not subscribe to a journal, you'd know nothing about it. Today, you can at least see what the title is. Often you can read the abstract. You can really figure out whether a particular paper, without reading that paper, you can figure out whether this is something that you really, really want to read. Okay? And if that's the case, if you do figure out that, yeah, looking at the abstract, this is something that I absolutely must read, you can contact the authors. And they can send you something. They might not be able to send you the exact paper because of copyright issues, but they might be able to send you enough information. Maybe they have a project web page where there's a lot of interesting stuff that has been put up. The National Science Foundation, for example, insists, or not insists, well, they insist on having a data management plan, but a lot of universities and a lot of foundations in the US, for example, are pushing researchers to actually put up all their raw data and their findings on some kind of a portal or a project web page. So if you can get access to all of those things, even if you can't get your hands on the exact paper, you should be able to get enough information on the study that was conducted and the results that were obtained to not really need the paper.
And sometimes if you contact the authors directly, which unfortunately is the only best answer that we have to, how do you get it if you can't get to it otherwise, is contacting the author. Even if they can't give you the published version, although a lot of copyright policies will allow authors to send out the paper. A lot of journals will allow that. If they can't give you the actual printed one, what they can give you is an early draft of the paper, or in some form, or something that's been published in a slightly different form. So they can usually get something to you, or a summary of what it is. One thing I wanted to point out to you, since you had asked about ResearchGate, asked about this. So what do you get from ResearchGate? I clicked on this PDF to show the PDF. This is the PDF on ResearchGate. So this is the actual paper. So this is this person's paper. And it's published in that journal. So you have direct access to it through ResearchGate because these authors, one of these authors, uploaded it. So
what about academia.edu?
Yeah, academia.edu is very similar. It is not. I have never seen academia.edu listed on Google Scholar.
The papers are available through the author in several instances there, right?
Yes, that is correct. You can get things, but if you go to academia.edu and you search for the author, sometimes you can find. If they've uploaded it, you can get access to it. But Google Scholar does not index academia.edu. I have no idea why. I don't know why it does ResearchGate and not academia.edu. So one other thing I want to point out to you very quickly, another really good opportunity or benefit that Google Scholar gives you. Remember that basically with Google, almost everything here is clickable. And, well, actually there's two more things I want to show you. But first, notice here this author's name is underlined. And earlier, when I showed you this thing here for My Citations, as I told you, you can get one for My Citations. That is exactly what this is. So if an author has set up their own specific citation page. They will be underlined when you search for them. Sometimes they have a picture. It gives their name, and also sometimes it'll give an email. This just says it's verified at this. But it tells you where they are, what their research interests are, and if they have a homepage or email, it will give it to you. So one neat thing about this, it gives you an idea of kind of how big of an impact has the author themselves had. So you can actually see here, authors also have indexes. And you read them the exact same way. This is technically the H5 index in this column, and this is the overall index. This is the total number of citations that this author has had, and this is the total number they've had in the last 5 years. And here you get this nice little chart where you can see what their citations have looked like and their primary co-authors. So, but much more interesting potentially for you, you can look at, one, what are the most cited articles that this author has, and also when were those published, and you can sort by year to very quickly find out, hey, this person has done something in my area or something in the area I'm interested in. Have they done anything more recently? So you can very quickly start looking and see, well, what are they doing now? As I told you, Google for the most part compiles this for you and keeps track of these citations and updates them for you itself. It does that automatically. You can go in and do some changes to it, adding and removing citations or papers that it finds. Because sometimes it will find weird random things and add them onto your profile.
A couple of quick questions.
Yeah.
Mekhala Sharma says if sufficient papers are not available on specific topic of interest on Google, what would be the next best approach to follow?
So I'm assuming what you mean by not available. So if we come back over here, so you don't have links here. The next best approach would be, so if it's not available here, you don't have access to it through your library. You can't get access to the library. If in Google, for example, it has a link, I would probably go in here, go to this researcher's homepage, or email them, either way, and ask them for it. So right here, I click on this is their web page, and there's his email address. Very quickly, I just kind of copy that, or you can click on that link, and email them and say, hey, I was really interested in your paper on whatever it was. But I can't get access to it because I don't have access to that journal and can't get to it. Can you please send this paper to me?
Okay. How about H-index and I-10 index? What are those? H-index and I-10?
Yeah. So H-index and I-10 index. So the H-index is the same. I talked to you earlier about the H5 index. So what this means. This is technically this researcher's H5 index, meaning that in the last 5 years since 2011, this researcher has 16 articles that have been cited 16 or more times. Overall, throughout their entire career, they have 22 articles that have been cited 22 or more times. H10 is a little bit different. What the H10 index is, this is the number of articles that this researcher has that has at least 10 citations.
Okay, you got 10, less than 10 minutes, Scotty.
What?
You got timekeeper.
Yes, I know. I don't realize I'm like almost out.
You got 8 minutes, yeah.
I know. That's why I mean. That's why I was wondering if I was going to go all the way through this.
Keep going. Yeah. That's why I keep chopping you up.
No, and that's fine. So if there are any other questions, I'm happy.
Yeah, we've done the questions. Keep going. Finish up whatever you want to do for the next 8 minutes.
Okay, good. So
the questions we'll take you later on. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So and that's basically everything.
Although I know Scotty needs to move on, but a really interesting question did come up, which I wanted to point out. Scotty, have you read this? How to identify the citations that are not because of a friend citing it or the original author citing it?
That's a very good question. So self-citation and close colleague citation, that's a problem in that with Google Scholar, in that you can't know if all of those citations, for example, it is possible that so this researcher, this paper has 37. So how do you know if these are self-citations or not? If you click here, these are all of them. So this is how you know who's citing it. So can we know if these are actually close friends of this person? No, we cannot. However, most likely, all of these people are not his close friends. And if you look, a lot of these citations here are actually from different people. So that's a good sign also. If all of these 37 citations were from them, one of the authors, or one other person, then you can assume that it's all self-citations. But otherwise, like I said, you can use the cited by. And it is quite possible. So if we come down here, I don't want to pick on anybody, but I guess I will. So this person, again, small number, but they're not self-citations. Again, let's say this one person only has one person that cited it, and again, not a self-citation. So that's how you would actually check to see all these primarily self-citations. There's not an easy way of doing it, though, other than just going through looking at the cited by. So there's one other thing I wanted.
So it's the same bit that if you see 3,000 citations, that they're not likely to be all self-citations.
Exactly. If 3,000 citations and most of them are self-citation, that person is publishing a lot. So one last thing I want to show you really fast, is the last thing here, is the cite option. And I'll talk a little bit about the save option. So I'll hit the save really fast, but notice here it has my library. If you sign in with Google account and you have a Google Scholar account, because of that, you signed in, it will keep your library. So this will keep links to everything you've cited, and if you click save, it will save this so you can quickly find it later and go back to it because it'll be saved in my library. However, citations are actually very useful in that we talked last time about citing references and how a lot of different areas have different citations and they want you to follow different formats. Google Scholar actually helps you by giving you citations to the 5 major citation types. One thing I will warn you about though with Google, it does this again, all of this is done automatically. So it's all automated. And I would say trust this about 60 to 70% of the time. It's right. The rest of the time, there's probably a little bit of something that is wrong. What I tend to see, what Google tends to get wrong, it's very good at getting the authors, year, title, and where it's published correct. This part here, which are the page numbers and the volume and issue numbers, if it's going to mess anything up, that's going to be the part that it's going to mess up. So if you are using Google to make your reference section, I would say always, especially if this looks strange, always double check it.
2 minutes.
Okay. Especially if it only has one page. Usually if something's published, it's not a one-page publication. So if you see only one page number there, you know that Google is wrong and that it's missing the end page number, and you should look that up. So that is it for today, and just a quick recap on what we talked about today. So we talked about, again, impact factors. I talked to you a little bit about what the Journal Citation Report is, what the H5 index is. We discussed Google Scholar in some detail. You can use it to find articles. You can use it to find the impact of journals. You can also use it to find specific articles within your area and how much of an impact they have. You can also use the Google Scholar pages, the author pages, to actually find detailed information and summarized information on authors of interest. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Last question. Why is Scopus believed to have more authenticity?
That's a very good question. So, honestly, it's because it was first.
Okay.
It has been around the longest. It was one of the first places to do it. Also, remember I told you what it takes to get into it. It takes a very detailed application. That application is looked at very, very thoroughly by the company. Yes, it is a company. It is a for-profit company that controls it. And they make that decision.
Okay.
Because of all that, there's a lot of emphasis on that being real information and it being authentic information.
Excellent. Thank you, Scotty. Thank you, Som, and everybody. Other questions, we'll send them to the apps, and they will respond. And we see you again in 2 days this time. There's another one this week on Thursday, same time. See you guys.
Okay,
bye everybody.
Thank you.
Bye everybody. Thank you.